Hello, welcome to Liberty Church of Christ, to our midweek Bible class where we are studying through the Bible. And tonight we start lesson number 17. This will be lesson 17 on our journey through the Bible, and we are in Joshua. Joshua chapter 1, and we'll be studying tonight chapter 1 through 11. So everybody get your Bibles out and get ready to study Joshua. Before we do, let's go to God in prayer. Mighty God, we thank you so much that you have given us an opportunity to study through your Bible, understanding that your word is powerful and it can guide us and lead us and help us. God, help us to see Jesus as we go through, because we know that Jesus is our Savior. You sent him to take care of our spiritual condition of failure, and we appreciate so much his blood that was shed for us on the cross. But you're also concerned about our physical well-being, Lord. And right now, the sound of my voice, there are so many people that are suffering because of various problems. We do ask that you will take this COVID pandemic and relieve us. Take it away from us. We know you're in control. Father, watch over us, guide us, and guard us as we journey through the Bible. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. We have just completed our study through Deuteronomy. And if you remember, Moses wrote the first 5 books of our Bible in the Old Testament, Genesis through Deuteronomy. He wrote that about 1,500 years before Christ was born. And those 5 books are called the Pentateuch, but it's also called the 5 books of law. It's the law of Moses. And at the end of those 5 books, which is Deuteronomy that he wrote, he's at the end of his life. He's right there on the Jordan River, and the whole country's ready to cross the Jordan River and take the promised land. The fathers have died in the wilderness, and this is the next generation that's going to go over and take the land. But Moses couldn't go. At the last chapter of Deuteronomy, we saw that Moses died. And he was buried in a place that no one knows. Now, it's probable that Moses did not write that last chapter because it records his death. Now, some say that he miraculously, with the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, was able to write that last chapter in the prophecy of his pending death and the fact that he would be buried, no man knowing where his tomb would be. And that's possible. The Holy Spirit can do anything he wants. But it's likely that someone else wrote that last chapter of Deuteronomy to cap it off and to say that this is what happened to the body of Moses and Moses himself. It could be that Joshua wrote that last chapter. He certainly wrote this next book, Joshua. So we've completed those 5 books of law, the law of Moses. And now we're going to be entering into that portion of the Bible that's the historical section, From Joshua, that's the beginning of the history books, we're going to see 12 books of history. And that's going to carry us all the way to Esther. So from Joshua to Esther, we're going to see 12 books of history. Now, we're going to see Jesus as we go through. It's just going to be historical facts. There's a lot of historical facts in these 12 books of history, but there's a lot of Pepsis there. P-E-P-S-I, the physical example portraying a spiritual intention. We're going to meet Jesus along the way, but they're primarily books of history. What happened to God's people? So let's get into Joshua. And we're in chapter number 1, and we see that Joshua is chosen to take over. Now, he's already been chosen. Moses knew that, and he wrote about it in Deuteronomy, and had been planning for Joshua and priming Joshua throughout the many years that they wandered in the wilderness, those 40 years. But this is the official time. Joshua's writing this text, and he is talking about himself. He's writing about Joshua did this, Joshua did that. So he's writing in the third person, but he's saying this is what Joshua did. But he's writing this, he's recording this by the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. But Joshua is told by God to take over. So just as God spoke to Moses, God is now speaking to Joshua. And God tells Joshua something very important in chapter 1. Look at verse number 6. Joshua 1 verse 6. He says, "Be strong and of good courage, for unto this people shalt thou divide for an inheritance the land, which I swear unto them or their fathers to give them." So Joshua, don't be afraid. Be of good courage. And Joshua is going to be of good courage. He's not going to fear much. And he accepts that call. He accepts that challenge. And the people rally behind him. Look at verse 16 of Joshua chapter 1. "And they answered Joshua, saying, All that thou commandest us, we will do. And whithersoever thou sendest us, we will go." So they're following Joshua now. Now, many years later, 40 years ago, when they were on the precipice of the Jordan River going to go over into the land of Canaan, they said no. They said, "Wherever you send us, we won't go." And they died in the wilderness as a result of their lack of faith. But now, this second generation has got a different tune. They're saying to Joshua, their new leader after Moses died, "Wherever you send us, we'll go. We're ready to cross over Jordan." That Jordan River is the barrier there, and going over into the Canaan land and take our promised land. So, Joshua in chapter 2 sends spies into the land. Now, there were 12 spies 40 years ago. Today, Joshua is only going to send 2 spies, and they're specifically going to spy out one city, Jericho. And these 2 spies go into a harlot's home, a prostitute's home. Her name was Rahab the harlot. And they take up residence there to be hid out. And somebody told the king of Jericho that they saw some spies go into Rahab the harlot's house. So he sent word to Rahab, "You turn those spies over." But Rahab said, "I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, some men came into my home, but I didn't keep them. I don't know where they are. Now, the last time I saw them," she said, "was by the gates, right before they closed it at sundown. Maybe they went out the gates and they're running. Maybe you should go and try to catch them." So the pursuers did take Rahab's word and started chasing them. But there was nobody to chase because they had not left the city. She had hid them on her roof. And there they were safe. Now, Rahab comes to these 2 spies, and she says something pretty profound. She says, "I know that the Lord," now she's talking about Jehovah God, not the gods of the Canaanite people, but the God of the Israelites, our God, the one we serve today. "I know," she said, that God, the Lord, has given this land to you." I know that. How do you know that, Rahab? Because of what happened at the Red Sea. That happened 40 years ago. So people have been talking about that in Canaan land, in Jericho and all the surrounding cities and all the land of Canaan. They've been talking about that event for 40 years. And not just the Red Sea, but also the campaign in the wilderness where you conquered different people. We know about that. We've heard about that. And we just know that your God is going to give you this land. So I'm asking you something, Rahab said. "Would you spare me? Spare me and my family." And the spies agreed. They said, "Our life for your life. Your life for our life. You save us and we'll guarantee that you will be spared, and your household, your family." She let them down out of her window because her house was on the wall, and she was able to put a scarlet rope, a scarlet cord out that window and lower those 2 spies outside the city walls. And those spies said, "You leave this scarlet cord or rope hanging out this particular window, and we'll tell everybody not to hurt anybody that's in that room where there's the scarlet rope hanging out the window." But they also warned her, said, "If some of your family don't come into that room, they'll be killed. And we're not responsible for that. You got to get in the room in order to be saved. Oh, isn't that an interesting Pepsi, we could call it? You got to be in Christ in order to be saved. And if you're outside Christ, then you're not saved. So we could use that as a Pepsi, perhaps. But these spies warned her, you stay in the house. If you're not in the house, you're not going to be saved. But they promised her that they would save her if stay in the house. So they escaped and they went to Joshua and gave their report. And part of that report was about Rahab and the family and the promise they made. But a major part of that report is this: the people are scared of us. That's what they told Joshua. They've heard about us, and they are scared of us. They're afraid. It's a good report, and that makes confidence in the army people that are going to go over and to fight Jericho. But first, before they can go to Jericho, they got to cross over Jordan. Got to cross the Jordan River. So the people were told to follow the Ark of the Covenant. When that Ark moves, wherever it goes, that's where they go. And they obeyed that. When the priests moved the Ark of the Covenant, they picked up and they followed that Ark. But they were told specifically in chapter 3 of Joshua to keep their distance from that ark. It's holy. That's God. And it's so very holy, so very powerful, you got to stand back. You can't get too close. In fact, they were told to stay 2,000 cubits. A cubit is 18 inches, a foot and a half. So 2,000 cubits is a long way. In fact, I did the math, and it's about a half of a mile. A lot of feet, 3,000 feet. It's about a half of a mile. So you got to stay a half a mile away as you see that ark moving. But you keep it in your sight, half a mile up there, and you follow that ark. So, God told Joshua, I'm going to make you great in the sight of all the people. There's something that I did with Moses, and I'm going to do a similar thing with you. I parted the Red Sea, and he used Moses to do it. Tell you what I'm going to do. God told Joshua, I'm going to part the Jordan River. You got to go across that river to get to Jericho. So I'm going to part the river. And I'm going to do it through you. And everybody's going to look at you like they looked at Moses, a great leader. Now here's how I want you to do it. You get the priests who are carrying that Ark of the Covenant about a half a mile up there. You get them to carry it to the Jordan River. Now at this time of the year, it's overflowing. It's the rainy season. But as soon as their feet touches the brink of the river, it will part. And it did. It parted. When those priests touched their foot into that water, the Jordan River just parted. And the priests went on into the riverbed. And they stood on a little hill, a little heap there in the middle of that riverbed. And they stood there until all the people crossed over the Jordan River on dry land. Very similar to what they did at the Red Sea. But in chapter 4, something interesting happens. When they all got out on the other side of the Jordan River, God told them to do something. He said, I want you to get one man from each tribe. There are 12 tribes, so get 12 men. Each man is to put a rock on his shoulder. So it's big enough to put on his shoulder. So it's a pretty good sized rock. And I want you to take that rock and I want you to go into the riverbed and make a pile of 12 stones in that riverbed. I also want you to take 12 stones out of the riverbed and make a pile on the bank on the other side of the Jordan River where you just crossed to. Now when those priests come out of that riverbed, the Jordan River come back together. And there's 12 stones at the bottom of that river in the exact place where those priests stood holding that ark while they're waiting on all the people to cross over the Jordan River. Now, I don't know where that is. Maybe it's still there to this day. But on the dry side, on the bank of the river, there's 12 stones piled up in a heap there too. And God said that's going to be for a memorial. When your children see those 12 stones stacked up there at the edge of the Jordan River, they're going to ask you, what does this mean? And you're going to have an opportunity to tell them that God led you across the Jordan River on dry land. That's how powerful God is. And so in that location, just on the other side of the Jordan River, it would be on the west side. They came from the east and they're going to the west. And on the west side of the Jordan River, they made up camp there. And they called this camp Gilgal. 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 Now, why did they call it Gilgal? The word Gilgal means rolling. And it's not the Rolling Stones. They carried them on their shoulders. There's a different reason that they call this rolling. And it's found in chapter number 5. In chapter 5, here's what we learn. All the people, the men that came out of Egyptian slavery some 40 years ago, had been circumcised according to the Abrahamic covenant. I want all your males to be circumcised, and anybody that's not circumcised will be cut off from the people. Even Moses had to circumcise his son, Gershom. His wife did it, but Zipporah did it. But God was angry with Moses unless he circumcised his boy. It's a covenant token between the people and God. But nobody that was born in the wilderness for these past 40 years had been circumcised. They were all still uncircumcised. And Joshua tells them in chapter number 5, get you some sharp stones and circumcise all the males. And they did it. It's a part of the Abrahamic covenant between God and themselves. And they circumcised all of their males. It was a sin. The Bible in the King James Version calls it a reproach. It was a reproach against God not to be circumcised, to be uncircumcised. And so when they were circumcised, it rolled away their reproach. And so they called the name of that place Gilgal. At the end of chapter number 5, we see something pretty amazing. And I'd like to read this text to you. It's verses 13 through 15. Read along with me if you'd like in Joshua 5, beginning at verse 13. It came to pass when Joshua was by Jericho, they still haven't got there yet, but they're close. He lifted up his eyes and he looked, and behold, there stood a man over against him with his sword drawn in his hand. Now Joshua went unto him and said unto him, art thou for us or for our adversaries? Verse 14, he said, the man, nay, no, but as captain of the host of the Lord am I now come. I am the captain of the army of God. That's what host means. I'm the captain of the army of God. And I'm here. And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and did worship and said unto him, what saith my Lord unto his servant? Now I want to stop there for just a moment. Joshua worshiped this guy. Now we know that if anyone receives worship other than God, that is blasphemy. And the penalty for blasphemy is death. Anybody who claims to be God deserves the death penalty. That's why when John, getting his revelation from the book of Revelation, 2 times in the book of Revelation, he fell down and worshiped the angel. And you know what that angel did? The angel picked him right back up and said, see thou do it not. Don't worship me, because he knew that he would be destroyed if he receives worship. Folks, the only one that can receive worship is God. And Jesus Christ, the Son of God, He received worship. And right here, this man that has sword drawn, who is the captain of the army of God, received worship from Joshua. Did not say, get up, Joshua. He accepted that worship. And Joshua said, well, what do you want us to do? And look at verse 15. And the captain of the Lord's host said unto Joshua, loose thy shoe from off thy foot. Take your shoes off. For the place whereon thou standest is holy. And Joshua did so. Sound familiar? When God was in the burning bush, He told Moses, take your shoes off. This is holy ground. Right here, this man, the captain of the army of God, said this is holy ground. That person is Jesus. You know, Jesus has been around way yonder before He was actually born in Bethlehem. He was around in the beginning with God. He was God. He is God. This is Jesus' appearance in the Old Testament. And we could say this is when Joshua met Jesus. And here's something interesting too. Joshua's name means, in Hebrew, it means Jehovah is salvation. That's what Joshua means. Hoshea, which is part of that, of Joshua, means salvation. Jehoshea, Joshua, is the Lord, or Jehovah is salvation. The name Jesus, given to Jesus there in Bethlehem, is Yeshua, Joshua. It's the same name. Jesus and Joshua are the same names, and they both mean Jehovah is salvation. In Matthew chapter 1, verse 21, when Jesus' birth was predicted, this is what was said. And she shall bring forth a son, and thou shalt call his name Jesus. Why? For he shall save his people from their sins. Salvation. Joshua, salvation. Jehovah is salvation. Met Jesus on the road to Jericho. Interesting indeed. There we have the captain of our salvation. Hebrews chapter 2 verse 10 calls Jesus the captain of our salvation. And this is the captain of the army of God. Joshua met Jesus that day. But in chapter number 6, they've got to go and conquer Jericho. And they were told just how to do it. He said, when you get there, I want you to march around that city quietly one time every day for 6 days. So for 6 days, once a day, don't say nothing, just quietly march around the city one time per day. But on the 7th day, I want you to march around that city 7 times. And at the end of that 7th time, I want these 7 priests here to blow their trumpets. And when they do that, I want all the people to shout as loudly as they can. And I'll tell you what's going to happen. The walls of Jericho will come tumbling down. Now, folks, that takes faith to do something like that. How would marching around a city, blowing trumpets and yelling, cause those massive walls of Jericho? And you can Google it, look it up, and talk about the walls of Jericho, how strong they were, how thick they were, how powerful they were. They fell. So look that up for yourself. But how could just marching and blowing trumpets and shouting make a difference? It's through the power of God, and it takes faith to do something like that. But they certainly did it. Now, they were told before they go into Jericho, when those walls come tumbling down, you go to Jericho and you just conquer the city. Now, here's what I want to happen, God says. I want the gold and the silver and the vessels of brass and iron to be taken and given to the Lord's treasury. Everything that's in that city, I want it to be destroyed, and I don't want one single person to take one single thing for themselves. Only the gold and silver and the vessels of brass and iron are to be given to God in His treasury, but not to any individual whatsoever. Well, they go in and they take the city, and the two spies that had been in that city prior knew where Rahab the harlot lived. They had been hidden there, and they knew where that scarlet cord was. So they go over there and they take Rahab and they take their family and they save them because they promised they would do so. But we learned something in chapter number 7. One of the men that went in to conquer Jericho was named Achan. And Achan, although he was commanded specifically, don't take anything for yourself. The good stuff you take, but give it to God. He saw something that he wanted, and he took it. It was a Babylonian garment, and it was also 200 shekels of silver, and it was also a wedge of gold, 50 shekels in weight. I looked it up, and according to my calculation, 200 shekels is about 2.5 pounds. 50 shekels, and I beg your pardon, 200 shekels is 10 pounds. 50 shekels is about 2.5 pounds. So he found him about 10 pounds of silver and found about a 2.5 pound wedge of gold and then that Babylonian garment. And he thought, man, who's going to miss that? I'll just take it. And he did. Although God specifically said, do not take anything. He took it to his tent. He dug a hole in the tent floor there and he buried it. Well, soon after the fall of Jericho, and by the way, Rahab the harlot was indeed saved with her family, and she ended up being in the lineage of Jesus. She is the great-great-grandmother of David, King David. So she's in the lineage of Jesus. Rahab the harlot is spared that day. But after that fall and after that conquest of Jericho, the next city on the campaign into Canaan land was a little tiny city over there called Ai. And it's spelled just like it sounds, A-I. So Joshua said, there's that little city over there called Ai. We need to conquer it. You don't need too many people, 2,000 or 3,000 people. Go take it. So they gathered up 3,000 people and they went to fight Ai to take it over. Just a small city. But Ai conquered those 3,000 people, defeated them. They came running back to Joshua in defeat. And Joshua was shocked. God, on their side, took the powerful Jericho. And that little tiny Ai defeated my 3,000 men army. And he fell on his face before God and started asking God, why would you let something like that happen? And God said to Joshua, get up off your face. There's sin in the camp. And you need to get that sin out of the camp. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to go through the camp, and we're going to isolate a tribe. And from that tribe, we're going to isolate a family. And from that family, we're going to isolate a household. And from that household, we're going to isolate an individual person. So, Joshua announced to the people, there's sin in this camp. That's the reason we couldn't take Ai. That's the reason God didn't allow us to take Ai. So he isolated, of the 12 tribes, he isolated a tribe, Judah. And then he isolated a family from Judah. And it was Zerah's family, Z-E-R-A-H. They're called the Zerahites. And he isolated that family. Then from that family of Zerah, he isolated a household. And it was Zabdi's household. And from Zabdi's household, he isolated an individual. And it was Achan. And he asked Achan, what has happened? Tell us what you've done. And Achan confessed. He said, I went into Jericho. I saw that garment. I saw that gold. I saw that silver. I coveted it in my heart, and I took it. And I buried it in my tent in the floor there. And they went and found it, just as he said. But they got sin out of the camp. They burned Achan and his family and all of his livestock and everything that he owned. Serious when you have sin in the camp. You got to get sin out of the camp. And they certainly did just that. And now that sin is out of the camp, they can go ahead about their campaign and get their work done. Hey, that's a lesson we can learn. Sometimes sin is in our life, and we wonder, why can't I go forward? Why can't I get the job done? Where is God in this? How come He's not supporting me in this work? Maybe there's sin in my life. I've got to get the sin out before I can move forward into the work that God wants me to do. But nonetheless, they were ready to move forward. So in chapter number 8, they fought Ai. That city had to fall. And they had a great battle plan. The battle plan was this: go up to Ai, just like you had just recently done. And then when the war starts, the battle starts, then you pretend to retreat, just like you did earlier. And the people of Ai, the warriors, will follow you. They will be drawn out of the city. And then you run from them. You're not really retreating. You just make them think you're retreating. And you run and draw them out of their city. Then you're going to have a second group of army men to go into the city and capture the city and destroy the city, while their warriors are running after this group over here, the first group. And that's exactly what happened. So when those Ai warriors were following after those people that were feigning or faking to retreat, they looked back behind them and they saw their city burning, because that second group had come in and destroyed it. So when that happened, these people out front, Israel, they were only faking about running. They turned around and they started attacking them. Now, the warriors of Ai have got people in front of them and they've got people behind them. They were trapped and they were destroyed. They brought the king of Ai to Joshua, and Joshua hanged him on a tree. But he took his body down before sundown, because the Bible clearly told him in the law of Moses, cursed is the man that is hanged on a tree. So you need to get that person hanged on a tree down before sundown. Oh, we saw that as a Pepsi, didn't we? Remember, Jesus Christ was hanged on a tree and his body was taken down. But he became a curse for all of us, because cursed is the man that's hanged on a tree. Well, they put this king Ai on a tree, but they got his body down by sundown and buried it. Then Joshua built an altar on Mount Ebal. Now this altar was built with whole stones. They weren't carved. They didn't have chisel and hammer on them. They're just a rock. And he put these whole untouched stones together and built this altar. And on that altar, he wrote the entire law of Moses. Now we know that Moses wrote Genesis through Deuteronomy. I don't know if he wrote from Genesis to Deuteronomy or just the law portion of that text. Could have wrote all of it, but he might have just wrote just the law of Moses. But he wrote it all on those rocks. And not only did he write it down, Joshua read it. He read the whole law in front of all those people right there at Mount Ebal that was written on those rocks. He's trying to tell these people, we're on our way, guys. We done took care of Jericho. We done took care of Ai. And we're making a campaign forward into the promised land. And we've got to remember the law of Moses and do not forget it. Now, because they had won Jericho and won Ai, there's people saying in Canaan, we got to stop these people. We've heard about them for 40 years coming across the Red Sea, conquering Egypt like they did. We've heard about them all this time. And now we're seeing them come over the Jordan River, took care of Jericho, took care of Ai. They're coming our way. So they get a coalition together. Let's all join forces in Canaan land to fight this enemy that's invading our territory. One city, and it was a big city, a huge city, they thought to themselves, we can't win. We know that their God is strong and powerful. It's on their side. This city was called Gibeon. Gibeon, or the Gibeonites, they had another plan. They got all of their animals together, and they put old sacks on these animals, and they pretended like they were traveling from a faraway place. They put on old clothes, they put on old shoes, they even got themselves some moldy bread, as if they were traveling through the land from a faraway country. And they come up to Joshua, and they said, "Oh, Joshua, we understand that you're coming into this land, and we want to make peace with you. We're not of this land. This is not our land. We're sojourners. See how we've been traveling so far. See these old clothes and these old shoes and this moldy bread." And Joshua believes them. He doesn't know that they're neighbors, that they're the Gibeonites, and he makes a treaty with them. He says, "We won't kill you. We will save you. We'll make a treaty because you're not part of this land that God has given us." 3 days later, Joshua learns that they are part of the land, that they had lied. They had deceived Joshua. Now Joshua came to him and said, "Look, out of deception you made this treaty with me, but I'll honor the treaty. We will not kill you, but you are going to be slaves from now on, perpetual slaves." And they were. Now in chapter number 10, a major battle ensues. This coalition of kings that had gotten together, of the Canaanites, saying, "Let's get together to fight these people." Gibeon did not join us. They had another plan to save their own skins. But let's all get together. And they did. These kings decided, and the king of Jerusalem was the ringleader. They decided to get together and fight against Israel. But first order of business was to kill the Gibeonites. What they did was traitor. They call them a traitor. They're Benedict Arnolds. We've got to kill them first. So they attacked Gibeon. And when they attacked Gibeon, Gibeon sent word to Israel and said, "Look, you have a treaty with us. You need to come and help us because they're going to kill us. It's too many of these kings that have come together to come and attack us. Please, Israel, come and help us." So they did. Joshua sent forth his army to conquer these kings that were coming up against Gibeon. In fact, they defeated them and put them on the run. And while they were running, God sent hailstones on them and killed them with the hailstones. In fact, the Bible says in chapter 10 of Joshua that more people were killed with the hailstones than were killed in the battle. Now Joshua needed a little bit more time to completely wipe them out. So what he did, he asked God, "Please God, give me more daylight. Let the sun stand still." And it did. Now that is a miracle. A supernatural. The sun did not set that day for about a whole day. And that gave them more time to round these people up and to completely destroy these kings that had come up against them. In fact, there were 5 kings that had made this coalition, and they made their way to a cave. The 5 kings did. And when they got in this cave, Joshua sealed the opening of the caves and trapped them inside that cave. And then he went on out with his armies and wiped up their army men and just completely destroyed their armies. He had plenty of daylight to do that. But then, after it was all over, they came and took away the stone from in front of that cave, and they brought those 5 kings out. And Joshua had these kings to put their necks down and said, "I want all my captains to come over to these 5 kings and put their feet on their necks." And that was a symbol of defeat. You guys, the captains, are more powerful than these kings. Step on their necks. And they did. And that showed all the people that God was powerful over great kings. And then after they did that symbolical thing where they stepped on their necks, Joshua had them put to death and hung them on 5 trees until the sun went down, because it finally went down. Now, the rest of chapter 10 is more campaigning of destroying, because they came in, hit Jericho, then Ai, and then they're going forward and they're making a campaign through the promised land, and there's more and more cities that they took over. But after that, they went back and camped in Gilgal. Remember Gilgal, rolling right on the bank of the Jordan River. But in chapter 11, a major battle ensues. It begins a long campaign. What happens is that more kings from Canaan said, we've got to stop these guys. They've already destroyed these 5 kings that we thought would stop them, but even they couldn't stop them. So they went out from as far as they could get as many men as they could get to stop this invasion of the children of Israel from coming and taking their land. And I'd like to read a few verses with you as we finish tonight's lesson in chapter 11. Look at verse 4. And they went out, they and all their host or armies with them, much people, even as the sand that is upon the seashore in multitude, with horses and chariots, very many. Folks, can you imagine the army that they have gathered together to stop Israel? It's huge, like the sands of the sea. And God told Joshua, don't be afraid. And he wasn't. Joshua was ready to go to battle. I don't care how many people come up against him or how big they are. He was ready to fight for God. Look at verse 15. And the Lord commanded Moses his servant, or as the Lord commanded Moses his servant, so did Moses command Joshua. Remember, in the first 5 books of the Bible, God was commanding Moses, and so Moses turned around and commanded that to Joshua. And verse 15 goes on to say, so did Joshua. Joshua obeyed the commandments. He left nothing undone of all that the Lord commanded Moses. He did everything that God had commanded Moses, that Moses had told him to do. Look at verse 18. Joshua made war a long time with those kings. When he went on campaign with the sands of the sea, that's how many people it was. He just kept working on them and made war with them for a long time. Look at verse 22. There was none of the Anakim. Now the Anakim were the giants. These were the huge guys, 9 feet tall folks. There were none of the Anakim left in the land. You remember when 40 years ago, when they spied out the land, they came back and said, we can't take that there land. There's giants in that land. We're grasshoppers in their sight. But when Joshua leads the campaign, there were none of those giants left. None of them in the land of the children of Israel. Only, now there were some left. Where were they? Only in Gaza, in Gath, and in Ashdod there remained. Gath is familiar. We're going to see Gath again. In fact, there's a giant that comes, and his name is Goliath, that's going to fight David. We'll see that when we get there in our journey through the Bible. And he is from Gath. And this area, Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod, are the Palestinians. They were called the Philistines in that day. Goliath was a Philistine. And these Philistines are the forerunners of today's Palestinians. But in verse 23, so Joshua took the whole land, according to all that the Lord said unto Moses, and Joshua gave it for an inheritance unto Israel, according to their divisions by their tribes, and, listen, the land rested from war. Now there's going to be more battles, and there's going to be more conquest, and there's going to be more acquisitions, but this was the major campaign that broke the land. It came in, and the resistance that was there against their invasion was just broken. There's nobody left that could stop the Israelites now. So later on, when they go out to conquer certain territories and there's no king, there's nobody really available to get a coalition together to stop them, that major resistance that they went into, that Joshua fought for a long time, was over. He defeated them. He broke that resistance and set everything up for them to conquer the rest of the territory. And that's why it said here in that verse that the land rested from war. The war was pretty much over, but there's some battles and, again, as we said, some conquering that had to be done. Next week, Lord willing, we will finish Joshua. We'll see more of that conquering, more of those settlements as we go through the Bible and finish our journey through Joshua. Really appreciate you being with us tonight. Let's go to God in prayer. Father, thank you so much that we are able to study the Bible together tonight, and for what you did, and for the fact that Jesus is all throughout your Bible. Jesus met Joshua, the captain of our salvation. Jesus, Joshua, Yoshua. Jesus is our salvation. Jehovah is salvation. And we thank you for our Jesus. It's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen. Appreciate so much you being with us, and we invite you back next time as we journey through the Bible.